Good afternoon. My name is Matt O'Connor. I'm a product manager from Google's cloud platform. And this is Philipp. He joins us from one of our partners, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And we're going to talk a little bit about some cloud security today. We really appreciate you guys sticking it out because we realize we're the last stop before cocktails. So hopefully we'll make this interesting for you all. Niels this morning spoke a lot. It gave you guys a good overview of how we think of, or what we've done to secure Google and to secure the cloud. What I was going to talk about a little bit here today is I was going to talk about our perspective on security from a Google point of view, to hopefully seed some thoughts with you all as you look to taking advantage of the cloud and be able to take advantage of some of the way we think about things. First of all, we live in kind of a rough world, and so one of the things that we are constantly doing is we're constantly doing a risk analysis of things that we do, and we're assessing our environment to help us make informed decisions. What I'm showing you here is this is an example of what the kind of the network weather looked like back in May. This is called the digital attack map. You can go find this online and look at it, and you can see the kind of the weather for today. But this is showing DDoS attacks and stuff, and we get a lot of this kind of traffic on our network. And so we've built capabilities to protect a lot of our services. Some of our cloud products take advantage of that. For example, if you're using our App Engine product, you're shielded from these kinds of attacks. But I'm just kind of trying to give you a sense of the global environment that we live in. We also think about, that there's kind of this traditional security model where, we're hard on the outside, soft on the inside. And so one of the assumptions that we're making from a Google point of view is that the network is compromised and that the threat is close to us. And so we're constantly working on defense in depth and doing smart kinds of things to minimize our risk, but also simplify the way we do things to help us mitigate that risk. A little bit more on the threat assessment. So I showed you the map, I showed you the attacks of what's going on, and these are the kinds of things that we're paying attention to, is to put more into that risk model. Who are our attackers? What kinds of things are they looking for? What are the high value things that we want to protect? And use that to inform our decisions. But the other thing, that we have is because we do this on a very large scale, we capture a lot of data and we use that data to help us make these decisions. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute because that's an important point here in a second. Niels talked about the 8 layers of the stack this morning, and I thought that was a fabulous presentation. Let me talk to you a little bit about some other kind of intangible pieces of that. But one of the, I wouldn't say necessarily intangible, but one of the things that we've done and we continue to do is we foster a very strong security culture. And we make security everybody's responsibility. We train people in security. We partner up with each other. When we see common problems, we'll address those and educate our employees to be vigilant for these kinds of things and avoid stuff. And through doing all of these kinds of activities, it helps us in simplifying the problem because we have many hands on the problem, and we've got people thinking about it, and we've got people collaborating with each other to reduce these risks and simplify the problems. Part of that culture is also giving back to the environment that we live in. And so what I'm showing you here is just several of the innovations that we've come up with over time that we've shared with the broader community, and we hope that you take advantage of. For example, two-factor authentication is a big thing that is really important to us. We use that on all of our employees. It's just the way we do business, and it becomes part of that culture, and it becomes a regular thing, and it doesn't become difficult for your employees to do to help protect your assets. Niels and Joe talked about all the infrastructure that we built and everything. I won't spend a lot of time on that. And then the other piece of it is that we're very operationally vigilant, and because we have this global network, which I can show you in my next slide, we have this point of presence. I showed you the threat map and what's happening in our environment, and we have this global network, and we're in over 33. We're just basically around the globe, which enables us to deliver applications with very high performance to users all over the planet. But also our customers of Cloud Platform get to take advantage of this network. But because this network's everywhere, we gather a lot of data. And the point that I'm trying to make is that we use that to make data-informed decisions. And so what I'm about to do is I'm going to hand things over to Aaron, and he's going to talk to you about a tool that his team has built that uses a lot of data to help wrangle the security problem.
Awesome. So thanks, Matt. Again, just by way of introduction, my name is Aaron Philipp, the head architect on our solutions that we're doing under the banner of something called Reinvent Security together in our Google Alliance. And just to talk just for 2 seconds about how this comes together in practice. If you look at PwC, we have a massive amount of business knowledge, how organizations run globally, how they manage risk, how they address change. You look at Google, what they have from a technology standpoint, being able to take those two things, put them together, is something that we've, as we've gone out to our clients and as we've gone out to the market, both from where their needs sit, and then also what we've been able to do to help them has been enormously impactful. What I'm going to talk about today, and this is kind of a subset of our security portfolio that we're working on together with Google, is what we generally call PwC Security Analytics powered by Google. And there's two main components to this. One is the actual security analytics itself, and the other is something we call the Threat Intelligence Fusion Center, which allows us to take threat intelligence from points all over the place, worldwide, fuse it together, actually understand what it means, what the risks are, and then map that into the organization, right? We've actually, and this is generally when I talk about this, people are surprised by this, but we've actually been doing this type of work for years for some very, very large clients. We built out really our first cyber analytics platform in 2012. And I'll give you a little background on why we had to do this, right? We were working a major investigation at that point where we had something on the order of 500 servers were compromised. We had about 550 billion artifacts that we had to get through. Many, many, many terabytes of data, which at that point in time was a fairly large scale set of data. And we had about 3 to 4 weeks to complete the entire investigation. Right? And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with kind of traditional forensic techniques, those types of things, but they simply were not going to cut it. And so we went and we looked and we said, all right, how can we actually accelerate all of this? And we built out our first platform, figured out how to pull in data programmatically, how to actually look at all of those images at once, how to map that from a normalization standpoint into the 550 billion artifacts we had on top of it, and how to actually, and this is really was most importantly for our clients, how to map what was happening in the business on top of that technical data. Right. And we did all of that in one of our labs in DC with about a 30 to 40 node Hadoop cluster. Right? So being able to take data that would have taken us days to search using kind of traditional methods, cut that down to something that we could run through Hadoop in about 4 hours, we thought we were all now data scientists, and it was going to be amazing, right? But let me tell you a little bit about what happened at that point. We ran our first search, and the first search ran on about 250 terabytes of data, and the result set was 5 terabytes, right? And we realized very quickly we had to get much, much better from an analytics standpoint, because how we were doing, and we were state of the art and, at that point in time as far as how to do forensic analysis. But what we were doing simply did not work, because the data that was going in was too big, and the data that we still had to cull through after the analytics was way too big. And so we had to really redesign and look at how do we layer in other things that are non-traditional, whether it be information about the business, unstructured data that's very difficult to work with. How do we start hooking this stuff in, right? And we really started about a 4-year journey of a lot of lessons around just that. How do we take in a PDF that comes from the US government that has a series of technical indicators that we need to go look for and immediately operationalize that, right? And how do you make sure that somebody doesn't inadvertently type in a keystroke wrong and then all of a sudden you're firing up all kinds of false positives you didn't know about? Being able to solve these problems at small scale is kind of an interesting problem, but being able to solve it at the scale our clients demand from us on a single engagement, and then what we do globally at that scale is a whole different ballgame. And so we built this stuff out internally, and when we started our alliance with Google, we first kind of approached them and said, hey, we've got these kind of interesting security tools we're using internally. This could be a really interesting alliance where we come together, use your platform, take what we know about how to actually do these types of analytics, how to layer in the business risk, and do it at real scale, right? And that's what we did. And so I just gave the example of being able to take a query from days to 4 hours in a Hadoop infrastructure. We now have that running essentially interactively in a matter of seconds using things like Google's BigQuery, right? And that's really irregardless of scale. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we start talking about some of the real world stuff we deal with. But just to give you an idea of what I consider scale and what we consider scale, we have a client that's coming up that has a requirement for 50 petabytes of data, 50 petabytes of data, right? The proof of concept we're doing with them will encompass about 10 to 15 petabytes worth of data. That's what we consider to be, I would call that moderately large scale, right? There's stuff above it, but we have to be able to address that need because that's what our clients are asking from us. So I have had the good fortune of being able to really kind of go around the world over the past 12, 18 months and talk to really some of the strongest companies and strongest public sector organizations worldwide. And this is what has come out of these conversations, right? When we talk to these guys, and it's really interesting because irregardless of sector, irregardless of where they're located, these are the general themes that come out. Number one, data volume massively increasing, right? This is led because of the problem I was mentioning before about imprecise analytics creating a whole bunch of alerts, a whole bunch of false positives. This has led to a massive backup in the people monitoring these alerts, right? If you look at any major breach, the company will absolutely get ripped apart because someone will invariably find an alert in their security systems that would have notified them about that breach that was unaddressed. But let's be fair to that organization for half a second, right? It is not uncommon for a large-scale organization today to be taking in 10 to 15,000 alerts per day. Being able to cull that down from 10 to 15,000 alerts down to the 5 that really matter is a massive, massive issue for companies worldwide, right? The other problem they're having is because of the large data scale and what they're having to do on the infrastructure side to build out storage, maintain all the regulatory requirements, actually be able to look at the data, they are having to make artificial decisions about what they look at and what they don't look at, right? And they're making these decisions not on the value of the data necessarily, but they're making it based on the size of the data. And so what happens is, and we see this over and over and over again in our incident response practice, where we go in what we call kind of right of boom after something terrible has happened, is they don't have the data necessary to actually complete the full picture. And the reason they don't have that data is because they had to make this kind of artificial choice about what they wanted to keep and what they wanted to give away, right? And that really goes down to this concept of limited budget, insufficient processing power, wealth of data not being used. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the inability to extract value out of the data. And this is something we've seen on the private sector side, and it's also something we see in the public sector side, where being able to tell good data from bad and actually linking the data together correctly and showing how it joins. So you may have something that seems worthless as this point up here, but being able to link it with vulnerabilities, be able to link it with threat intelligence, be able to link it with what's happening in the business, and actually do all of that at scale and at pace is a very, very hard problem, right? So this is, when we looked at what we wanted to address with this solution, this is really where our heads were at. And so we came up with these 4 kind of foundational requirements, right? One, we call automation of detection, and I'll explain what that means in a second. 2, superior intelligence. Being able to take in threat intelligence from all over the place and make best use of it at scale, absolutely critical. Visibility of everything, not just focusing on the technical data, but actually understanding what it means to the business and the organization as those alerts come in, as they're prioritized, and as they're dealt with, right? And then lastly, real-time analysis. If you're not able to do 1, 2, and 3 at scale in real time, there's not a whole lot of value in 1, 2, and 3, right? You can do some of this stuff in batch, but being able to do this in real time and catch this stuff, especially as stuff moves into kind of these newer infrastructures where you can actually automate responses in the infrastructure, is going to be absolutely vital, right? So let's talk about 1 and 2 just for half a second here. Automation detection, what do we mean when we talk about this, right? Historically, security analytics, writ large, has been about pattern matching, signature analysis, kind of first order analysis. Some of the more advanced stuff that's coming out, maybe certain types of clustering and those types of things around basic counting, right? It's really interesting when you see kind of what, in these really advanced clients, what works and what doesn't. I can kind of break it into 2 buckets from what we've seen. Things like anomaly detection, machine learning, those are what I would call kind of near time predictive, right? So maybe they can predict to an hour, maybe they can predict to minutes. They're not going to give you a week warning or 2 weeks warning or 3 weeks warning that something's happening. Generally, they are there to find the unknown unknowns that are already occurring in the network, right? And there's a massive amount of research going into how to do that better. And the great news for us is having a partner like Google being able to take what they're doing on the machine learning side, leverage that into these types of business problems is actually really, really interesting, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when you talk about long-term actually getting ahead of the threat intelligence by far is where that sits today, right? And this is understanding when a sophisticated threat group has started up a new campaign and understanding that they're hitting some other region of the world, and we know from past experience that they start there to test all their tools, and once they're comfortable with everything, they will then move to the US, right, or whatever region you happen to be in. Having that kind of visibility and that kind of view and actually being able to operationalize that is absolutely critical for organizations going forward. So we look at these, number 1 and number 2 as kind of this near term and longer term thing. The other side of this is, going back to the machine learning concepts, being able to take in some of the things like the image recognition and image classifier stuff actually can marry into visibility of everything, right? So being able to take unstructured data that are screenshots or desktops, those types of things, and being able to pick up when a terminal window has been opened just by using kind of image recognition is something that's very, very interesting, right? Because there may be some obfuscation, anti-forensics they're doing on the back end to not pick up when cmd.exe gets run, but we can pick that up actually on the front end using image recognition. And I've talked around this, but I just want to hit a couple points. And this is, when we talk about this with our clients, being able to kind of dip into this, for lack of a better term, massive pool of resources, whether it be compute, whether it be storage. I remember when I made the phone call about the 50 petabyte thing, saying, hey, is this going to be a problem for you guys? The answer was no, and it was not just no, it was like, tell us when you want to start, because we can go ahead and just ramp this up like tomorrow if you need to, right? So being able to do that kind of activity and being able to throw 30, 40 nodes if you need to at just a parsing engine because you have some really complicated ETL you're trying to do, and have that still be cost effective is an absolutely massive differentiator when you look at how these how things are done today in security versus how they can be done in the future. So having said that, I want to dive a little bit into what we're actually doing on the threat intelligence side, right? We do a lot. It's interesting, people think of us as kind of an accounting firm. Some of us know we have consulting. We're actually one of the largest, if not the largest, information security practice in the world on the consulting side, right? And we have offices in, I think we have 157 countries, give or take. Don't quote me on that exact number. We have hooks cross-region and around the world. And being able to take data from all those different client bases and understand what that means and map that into some of the other collection activities we do is very interesting, right? So we're actually tracking around 110 different distinct threat actors. This generates a ton of data, right? So just to talk through what this actually means from a, what do you do with it once you collect it? Our Threat Intelligence Fusion Center platform that we talked about, what we use internally, has something in the order of, I think it's 200 million, give or take, documents in it, right? From all over the place. We've mapped that into a very, very large graph, and being able to do threat analytics on that in real time, as data comes in from all these different parts of the world, absolutely, absolutely critical, right? And when we help our clients out with how they solve these problems, we're finding more and more and more, they start collecting threat intelligence. Maybe they have some public-private partnership, maybe they have some feed they're paying for, and they realize very quickly they have a problem because they have no way to, one, they have no way to operationalize it, to actually get it into their environment to check what's happening. And then two, even if they did have that way to operationalize it, they have no way to rank order it, right? And so what'll invariably happen is we'll find out from them that somehow IP addresses of a CDN or some other kind of massive infrastructure piece have ended up on a blacklist, and it just knocked out kind of 30% of their business process because they inadvertently blocked something from a threat intelligence standpoint without actually properly vetting it first, right? So being able to do that type of analytics as that data comes in, rank order it, combine it together, understand what a low quality feed is telling you versus a high quality feed, what the confidence difference is, how to make those decisions, and how to automate all of that is something that's one, for sophisticated clients, very important now. But as the kind of next year and a half, 2 years goes by, as more threat intelligence comes out, especially in the US around some of the laws that have just been released, is going to be absolutely vital, right? The other side of that too is information sharing. So how does that get linked with companies together, right? So if you have a set of indicators that you have gotten off your network because you're seeing some campaign that no one else is seeing, how do you make sure that efficiently moves across the wire to all of your partners, to folks that you have information sharing agreements with, and how do you make sure that that doesn't somehow have a knock-on effect to where you adversely disrupt the business of a partner, right? When you start kind of unpeeling what these threat intelligence concepts actually mean, you start to see what the challenges from an analytics standpoint are really starting to present, right? So it's not just about having pictures of the building these guys work in, which is kind of academically interesting, but it's really about, all right, how do I use this information to best protect my estate, my business partner's estate, and kind of the ecosystem writ large. So I'll talk a little bit about what we actually do with our Threat Intelligence Fusion Center. This was born out of our internal practitioners wanting to share data more effectively, right? And so we had to build a platform that would allow them to very easily, seamlessly, and frictionlessly upload these PDF reports, Word documents, text files, emails, whatever it may be, drag and drop them in, extract out all the indicators, and then actually operationalize that data, right? So there's a massive amount of work that went into figuring out how to, when you drag and drop a PDF in, how to rip out kind of all the technical data in that report, and then create a workflow around that So you have second and third level reviewers actually saying, yes, this is what we think it is. Yes, we're assigning this confidence to it. Yes, we think it's this malicious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Because when you start getting at the scales that we operate at, just internally, and then also our clients operate at, 95% accuracy is not good enough, because that can mean, massive amounts of false positives and massive amounts of hits, right? So there's still very much so a role for kind of this process wrapped around the technology. Being able to integrate with third-party solutions that actually allow us to go out and interrogate the infrastructure, right? So hooking into a solution, such as Tanium or one of these endpoint solutions is absolutely critical, because those are the tools that are going to have the visibility at the endpoints to be able to push and pull this data and actually allow us to pivot very, very quickly. When we look at kind of the life of a SOC analyst, a Security Operations Center analyst, and kind of the SOC 1.0 architecture which exists today, they spend hours switching between tools, switching between technologies, switching between online, offline stuff, going out and investigating things, trying to pull all this data together. Typically, they jump into some kind of Excel spreadsheet. They create some kind of timeline. It's not uncommon for these SOCs to have one guy whose entire job it is to maintain some kind of spreadsheet of metrics, right? If you take that and actually move to kind of this integrated architecture concept, where all the threat intelligence is married to all the endpoint technologies, which has a massive analytics backbone behind it, that actually allows you to overlay the business risk on top of that and see it all as kind of one pane of glass as part of the native alert. What we're seeing in terms of operational efficiency is just absolutely massive, right? So they're going from hours, to days to investigate an incident, down to half hour, 15 minutes, 8 minutes in some cases, right? And so there's a lot to be said for doing this work up front and actually setting these single pane of glass up and actually pulling all the data into one place. We went, just on the forensic side and the IR side, by doing that, our average time to investigate a system went from about 3 to 4 days down to an hour, hour and a half, right? And that's doing kind of the full forensic analysis, because we automated on the back end, we parallelized on the back end all the extraction of that data out. And we automated what we could, and we left the art to the analysts to be able to construct what they needed to construct. And we're going to, it's my personal opinion, we're going to see these kind of optimizations all over the place. And so when we talk about machine learning and those type of things, those things are very interesting. But just being able to get the data in one place and have all the data present for analysis is actually going to be huge in getting efficiencies out of it. So I want to talk a little bit about what a proof of concept looks like for us. These data numbers are a little small compared to what we're actually doing now on proof of concepts. If you look at what we're doing currently, we actually have a proof of concept where we're taking in about 6 terabytes of data a day. We're maintaining that 30 millisecond processing time, so that's everything from ETL all the way through to analytics, threat intelligence lookup, et cetera. Instead of 2 million queries, which is still a great number, I'll talk about that in a second, we're actually seeing about 45, 50 million queries being run against that data, right? So the more you get the data, the more you make it accessible, the easier you make it to query. Ironically, we're finding people query it more, which is great. So let's talk a little bit about this proof of concept. So we started out with, I think there's 32 use cases that were going to be completely custom built for the client, right? We started taking in data. We took data from about, I think it was 400 different log types. We took in as just kind of a massive stream. We had them mirror off their existing log infrastructure. Within about 36, 48 hours, most of that had to end up having to be a bit custom parsing. 36, 48 hours, we had 96% of the data parsed out. I think in the next week we had something on the area of 99.5% of it parsed out, and then we got the last 5.5% when we needed it, right? So being able to have that kind of agility and being able to scale up just transparently what you're doing just on the parsing side and actually make that data usable that quickly was massive, because we started receiving data on a Thursday, and then the following Friday, we were down there with 15 custom use cases fully executed through, right? And showing them stuff that none of their other security tools or their security platforms had been able to show them. And a lot of that goes back to how quickly we were able to spin up the Google infrastructure, how we were able to use those tools, how we were able to not have to focus so much on absolute efficiency of the code, but actually just getting it to work and then able to make it more efficient on the back end as we could scale it down, right? Really interesting story kind of about this, the 2 million queries run. 1 million of those were run within a 24-hour period. That kind of a spike on a lot of kind of on-prem platforms where they just have a couple servers running and they're running it, would have absolutely tipped the platform over, right? Would have just crashed it. The only notice we had that something was a little bit up was we got an email saying, hey, can you check the connectivity? It looks like the platform may be running a little bit slow. And actually what had happened is we kind of hit the limits on the scaling. We upped the limits within, I think, 2 hours, no downtime, no anything else. The entire platform was back up to normal. Another really interesting thing that we found out about this, and we actually found out about it after the fact, I didn't even know this until the CISO told somebody else about it. They decided to do a stress test on the infrastructure and find out if they could crash our infrastructure because they wanted to see what our limits were. And so they went ahead and they just, without telling us, they tripled the amount of data coming in. And we didn't even notice, right? And all the speeds, everything else kind of scaled up. It all kept running, no problems, right? Being able to do that because of what Google's put together in their infrastructure and what we're doing in these kind of cloud-native technologies. You try that with an on-prem, and they did try it with an on-prem technology, and it crashed and fell over, and took them and took the other the other group a couple days to actually get back to operational form, right? And this story occurs not just at small scale but large scale, which is great. So when we actually look at what we're doing here, every piece of threat intelligence that sits in our threat intelligence portal, the Threat Intelligence Fusion Center, is looked up in real time as that data comes through, right? So for our internal instance, that's about 22 million indicators, right? Massive number of indicators. For clients, it's generally a bit smaller number. But it gives you an idea of what you're able to do and actually able to rank order, right? And this all results in being able to take in multiple dimensions. So you can look at threat intelligence. If you have a hit, you can marry it to what's actually on the system. So what the business risk of it, does it contain third-party data? Are there certain vulnerabilities that we know about that are on the system? Does it play a very important role in certain types of business processes? And how does all of that link together, right? And being able to use that to rank order the criticality of the alert so that you can start pushing down some of the noise alerts and actually using some kind of interesting stuff to fully marry those out, and then really raising to the top the ones that are going to impact the business in very, very critical ways, right? And so just the punchline on this proof of concept is we were side by side with another company at the time. And the time it took them to, I think, execute 5 or 6 custom use cases, we were actually able to execute on 38, right? And it was so much so that they actually asked us, and this is something really, really interesting as well when you use these types of cloud technologies where you have this open data architecture. The fraud team found out about this and said, hey, we know you're doing a bunch of stuff on the security side, but you have that data sitting there. Can you use that data for fraud, right? And within I think a day or two, we had a couple dashboards put together showing how we could use all the same sets of data with a little bit of additional stuff from a transaction standpoint, financial transaction standpoint, to show how we can now take that same data and have a fraud alerting system, right? And they're looking at this now saying, wait a minute, we have all these different infrastructures in our environment that are collecting this type of data, right? And we have many different copies of this data. Why don't we just have it all in one place, and then all these different groups can use it, right? So we're now seeing the applications group, the infrastructure group, the security group, the fraud group, some of the customer satisfaction groups are all looking at how they can use the same data with different cuts in different ways. And that's when you really, really start to get to very interesting things, because then you're able to, if you see something on the customer satisfaction side, somebody calls into a call center, they're trying to social engineer, and you want to marry that up to what's happening on a database at the same time, that becomes very easy because all the data is just sitting there, right? And you can start to do these really, really interesting kind of data-driven analytics. And I'll go ahead and I just have a couple screenshots here just to talk through. This one's what I would call fairly basic, but just to show how we're able to put a lot of this on one pane of glass, where you have stuff coming in from all over the place, all these different devices, and then also actually showing the type of data that resides on these different systems, right? And being able to link all of this up just part of the native platform is something our clients have found to be enormously useful. Anomaly detection, we have anomaly detection. Just to show, to walk through, this is a very basic example of how we would do this with firewall data. We're actually able to use this with user data. We have a portfolio of 5 different algorithms that we use for different things depending on what the situation is. And we can run anomaly detection kind of on your basic stuff, but then actually when you start to get to user activity, data activity, all those types of things where you start to get some really, really interesting use cases on the anomaly detection. And this is really all about driving to the unknown unknowns that you may not know about, right? And I don't know how many of you have worked with anomaly detection before, but it's really, it can be very messy to deal with, because when an anomaly fires, there's generally very little context about why that anomaly fired, other than to say, this is what we were looking at, and we found an anomaly, right? So being able to have all this data in one pane of glass to where you can drill in very quickly to all the data around the anomaly and understand what was happening, both with the event itself, but also at the baseline, understanding how it typically looks, is something really, really critical. And I've talked about this already a bit, but full threat intel integration. This was something very important to us. So it's not about having 2 separate systems, one that manages threat intelligence and then one that manages the lookups against the threat intelligence, but actually having all that connected together and being able to act on that data in some kind of algorithmic way, really, really critical. Because we see time and time and time again from a process standpoint, when an organization has those 2 systems disconnected, threat intelligence gets missed. Because they invariably, for some reason, will not move that over. It moves over in batches. The other side of that, too, is when you introduce new threat intelligence into the ecosystem, so you have some new report that just came out from ICS CERT or whatever it may be, being able to do that retrospectively and say automatically every 24 hours, go back and search my logs for all of these indicators and tell me if I have an issue, right? And then have a report sent out nightly on that is something really critical as well. In this second screenshot you'll see down here, you see kind of the beginnings of what look like a network graph. The other thing that we see as being really, really important is being able to actually keep all this in one related structure, right? Because you will start to see kind of these emergent patterns pop out when you do it that way. And if you're using some of these smaller scale graph tools, which are phenomenal tools in their own right, and you kind of have these different versions of each threat group or different versions of what's happening, you are going to miss connections between threat groups, between tools usage, between infrastructure. So, and to make this concrete, we see time and time again where an individual has defected from one threat group to another, especially in some of the cybercrime groups, and all of a sudden the cybercrime group picks up a whole new range of tactics that they never used before, right? Being able to pick that up and to actually understand what's happening underneath the hood there, and the fact that somebody may have moved over, and all of a sudden now, whenever you go up against group X, you start looking for all the tactics group Y uses as well, is enormously beneficial to our clients and in protecting kind of society writ large. Being able to do that without all that data sitting in one place is a very, very difficult exercise, right? So it's absolutely critical to keep very, very noisy data at scale and then understand how to kind of rank order that data up and down. So endpoint monitoring, and there's a kind of a massive conversation going on in the industry now about agent versus no agent. When do you deploy an agent? When do you not need an agent? And it's really fascinating. So this entire dashboard was created with no endpoint, with actually no agent on the servers. We were actually just using the native logs that came off the server to do this, right? Typically, it's actually very hard to do these types of things because a lot of this came out of a certain type of event log type that's very, very unstructured, very difficult to deal with, very hard to parse. Being able to use Google's platform and actually scale it to where we can really just hammer away and parse that stuff at scale and not have to worry about throwing 20 nodes at it allows us to create this type of visibility into the environment where we can say explicitly on any system that contains third-party data, whether it be regulated data or otherwise, these are the programs that were added and removed, these are the users that did it, this is the time frame, these are the security tools that may have been turned off, and to do all of that without agents, especially on some of these older systems, is absolutely vital, right? Now, having said that, if they do have agents out there, we want to be able to take full advantage of those as well. And we do have, we've spent a lot of time because we think it's really, really valuable to be able to do push and pull from those agents. So if we want to take all the data they're seeing, pull into dashboarding, do the analytics, but then also we want our analysts to be able to pivot on that data and interrogate the endpoints themselves, right? So if they see something in this where they may want to do a second level and actually pull a hash value that gives them a fingerprint of one of these programs, we want them to be able to do that without having to leave the ecosystem and pull up yet another pane of glass, right? And this is really all about kind of joining this stuff together. Lastly, we got to have eye candy at some level, and this is that eye candy. But it does actually demonstrate a really interesting point, which is we're able to, as the data comes in, fully geolocate it, do all the anomaly detection, do all of that kind of stuff, map it onto this visual, create this really kind of interesting SOC visual that, while it looks pretty and all those types of things, can actually convey information as well. Because all of a sudden, if you see this and then you see a massive connection going to a country you don't do business with, that should fire up an alert. Somebody should go run that down. And so it's really all about creating these kind of novel and interesting ways to look at the data that may have been possible with certain types of infrastructures before, but we really want to be able to do that across the board, right? And do that in a cost-effective manner and do it in a manner that helps organizations best protect themselves. And that's really what we're focused on when we talk about our security analytics solutions and how we're helping our clients kind of move through some of these problem sets. So with that, I believe we have finished with kind of 2 minutes to spare. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for listening to the presentation today. If you have any questions, we'll be around up here after the talk. Otherwise, thank you for hanging out for the last slot, and have a great one.